Welcome to Lesson 1, where we're uncovering practical life lessons for our daily living. Today, we're starting quite an extraordinary journey, pulling back the curtain on the historical background and the birth of Moses. This is all found in those foundational chapters of Exodus. And really, this isn't just some ancient story. It's a profound look at how God interacts with people, especially when life feels, completely overwhelming. Our mission here for this deep dive is to really distill some powerful insights from these old accounts and show you how they connect, how they resonate directly with the challenges and maybe the opportunities you face in your own life today.
Exactly. And that word Exodus itself, it comes from the Greek exios. It means the way out. You can almost picture it like a bright exit sign in a dark place, or maybe that sudden clear path when you thought you were totally trapped. This whole book, right from the very start, it's really a testament to God always finding the way out for his people. It's this huge story of redemption, deliverance, and ultimately final salvation. And it all points back to a God of, unwavering love, profound truth, perfect justice, liberating freedom, and just boundless forgiveness. He's a God who time and again miraculously showed his personal care, his protection. It really is a source of hope, isn't it, for anyone who's ever felt oppressed or pushed aside or, just forgotten. Because the same God who faithfully delivered the Hebrews back then, he can and he absolutely will deliver you too.
That's powerful. And you definitely find that core message echoing really strongly in our memory text for this deep dive. It's Exodus chapter 2, verses 23 to 25. It says, "The children of Israel groaned because of the bondage, and they cried out, and their cry came up to God because of the bondage." So God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel and God acknowledged them. You see, it's a story about a God who doesn't just hear maybe the silent groans or the desperate cries. He actively responds. He sees their struggles, he notes their tears, and he moves with purpose, with intention for them. It's quite a powerful start to an incredible journey we're looking at. Okay, so let's unpack this beginning in Egypt. Exodus opens, and it looks, almost perfect for Jacob's family. They arrived as this small group, he said 70 people.
Just 70 souls, yes.
Welcomed, treated well, all because of Joseph's amazing influence. He was basically running Egypt, wasn't he?
Pretty much the prime minister, yeah. They were given the best land, protection. Seemed like they were set.
But then, as the story unfolds, things change, and fast. That idyllic picture just darkens dramatically. So what exactly happened? How did this favored, welcomed family turn into, slaves?
Yeah.
How did that initial prosperity, which seemed so secure, just crumble so quickly?
It is a really stark transition and, a profound lesson in how quickly things can change. The initial blessing, it was truly astonishing. From those 70 individuals who came into Egypt, escaping famine in Canaan, they just multiplied, grew exceedingly mighty, it says, filled the land. And this wasn't just like normal population growth. It felt almost supernatural. It was a direct fulfillment, actually, of God's promise to Abraham back in Genesis 15:5.
Yeah.
That his descendants would be like the stars in the sky, countless. And by the time of the Exodus, just a few centuries later, their numbers were huge. About 600,000 men on foot, the text says. And that's not even counting women and children.
Wow. So we're talking potentially.
Maybe 1.5 to 2 million people, possibly more. Imagine that explosion. Their prosperity, their sheer presence, their influence in Egypt became undeniable. It was a clear sign of God's blessing, his faithfulness to that covenant promise.
Right, that rapid growth really sets the stage because then, almost abruptly, the Bible says, a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. It doesn't sound like a gradual thing, a slow decline in favor. It sounds sharp, immediate. So what's the history behind that sudden shift? And what was the immediate impact on the Israelites, considering how well they'd been treated before? And this brings us to a key question, doesn't it? What does this account tell us about how we should never take circumstances, especially the good ones, for granted?
Oh, that phrase, a new king who knew not Joseph, it's packed with meaning. Historically, this marks a huge political and social upheaval in Egypt. It points to the overthrow of the Hyksos dynasty. They were foreign rulers who had been in charge, and they were replaced by native Egyptian pharaohs who started the powerful 18th dynasty. Now, Hyksos, being foreigners themselves, probably didn't mind Joseph, another foreigner, rising so high.
Makes sense.
They were likely the pharaohs who welcomed Joseph's family. But once the native Egyptians took back control, figures like Ahmose, probably the new king mentioned, their whole perspective shifted dramatically. And Ahmose's successors, rulers like Amenhotep the Assasside and Thutmose, they continued, even escalated the oppression. Now, the why behind this sudden drastic turnaround, it was, complicated. First, there was fear. Genuine fear. The Egyptians saw the Israelites' booming numbers and worried.
Worried they'd side with enemies.
It's exactly. Worried they might join Egypt's enemies in a war, maybe try to leave the land. And leaving would mean losing this massive essential workforce. Plus, the potential for an internal uprising. Second, it was about exploitation, pure and civil. They saw this huge population as a ready-made source of incredibly cheap, abundant labor.
Yeah.
So they forced them into brutal slavery, made them build these treasure cities or supply cities, places like Pithom and Ramses, basically huge storage depots and military bases.
Yeah.
And the practical lesson here, if you're listening, it's incredibly powerful. Human favor, comfortable jobs, positions of influence, even environments that seem totally stable and prosperous,
Yeah.
they can change, literally overnight.
The ground can shift.
What feels like solid ground can, and often does, just disappear from under our feet. So this story really challenges us, doesn't it? To think about where our true security lies. Is it in these fleeting human arrangements?
Mm-hmm.
And the goodwill of others? Those things are so temporary. Or is it grounded in the unchanging character, the eternal promises of God? It's a profound reminder, really. Build your life on a foundation that doesn't depend on the shifting sands of good circumstances. Build it on God's faithfulness.
Yeah.
That's the anchor. That's what won't fail.
And yet, even right in the middle of this horrible, escalating oppression, there's this fascinating paradox. Exodus 1:12 says it. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. That's completely the opposite of what Pharaoh wanted, isn't it? His whole strategy was to crush them, diminish them. Instead, they flourished. What does this incredible resilience tell us about God's sovereignty? Especially when things look so dark, when human plans seem to be totally in control.
It tells us that no matter what humans plot, no matter how clever or cruel the enemy's schemes might seem, God is still absolutely in control. He remains sovereign. The very oppression designed to crush them, to reduce their numbers, ironically fueled their growth instead.
A divine reversal.
Exactly. Pharaoh wanted them to shrink, but God's blessing just caused them to multiply like crazy. It really underscores that even when circumstances look completely hopeless from a human perspective, when the enemy's plans seem most severe, maybe even successful, God is still deeply at work. He can actually turn the enemy's own plans back on themselves to achieve his divine purposes. It's just this powerful demonstration that no human power, no oppressive government can ultimately stop God's plan for his people.
Okay, this leads us to a really challenging question. It's often a painful one, I think, for anyone facing long-term hardship. Why did God allow the Hebrews to live in Egypt and be oppressed for so long? We're talking 400 years of affliction here, generations of suffering. What was the deeper purpose behind allowing this prolonged suffering? Why didn't God step in sooner, especially for a people he had chosen?
That is a deep question, absolutely. And it touches the very character of God and the mystery of suffering. Now, God never delights in suffering. He's not the author of evil. But his allowance of it, his permission of it, often serves a larger redemptive purpose, one that stretches across generations and reveals profound truths. The sources suggest several reasons for this long period. First, it was a time for the Hebrew people to actually multiply into a mighty nation. This was fulfilling God's covenant promise to Abraham. That promise required a huge population. They needed to become a nation, not just a family, to fulfill their destiny.
Okay, grace was part of it.
Yes. Second, this time in Egypt served as a period of purification and preparation. Living in a pagan land, they were constantly exposed to idolatry, but their suffering often drove them back to God. It was like a crucible, designed to strip away self-reliance and build a deeper dependence on him, to make him distinct from the nations around them. And third, their spectacular deliverance, when it finally came, was meant to be an object lesson for all the surrounding nations.
A
huge one. Through God's wonderful works in Egypt, his plan was to reveal himself as a God above all human authority and greatness, to show his power to a world drowning in idolatry and the worship of many gods. So their suffering prepared them for their unique role to be a people who would exemplify God's law and character to the whole world. Now, about the length 400 years and why God didn't jump in immediately. Well, God's timing often seems very different from our own finite desires, our immediate expectations.
We want relief now.
Exactly. We cry out for instant rescue from our limited viewpoint, but God sees the much bigger picture, the eternal story. He knows the beginning from the end. Their long stay allowed the fullness of his purposes to unfold, both for Israel and for Egypt, believe it or not. And here's that crucial distinction you mentioned, something often missed, but it helps us understand human suffering more broadly. While the national suffering spanned 400 years, no single individual lived through that entire period.
Right, that's important.
It is. Each person's suffering, the real intent, deeply personal, had a finite end with their own individual life. Thinking about it that way helps us grasp that even within these long generational or societal trials, God's care is still intensely personal, individual. He acknowledges, he's intimately concerned with the pain and tears of each individual. Your personal suffering isn't endless or without meaning in his grand design. That brings immense comfort, I think. It assures you that God sees, he measures, each person's unique experience within his overarching redemptive plan. For every single person, there's a finite end to their personal suffering on this earth. And ultimately, life's difficulties can be overcome by God's grace. That grace, which we receive through Christ, it's our only true, solid hope. It empowers us to do all things through him who gives us strength. God knows your tears. Your experience matters to him. It's seen. It's valued. That's a profound thought, bringing personal comfort even amidst collective pain.
Okay, so that context of suffering and God's bigger plan brings us to Pharaoh's, well, his ultimate act of cruelty. As the Israelites just kept multiplying, despite the harsh treatment, Pharaoh escalates. A horrifying decree: destroy every single male Hebrew baby at birth, specifically ordering them thrown into the Nile River. This wasn't just, a political calculation anymore, was it? This feels like a direct attack on God's plan itself.
Oh, absolutely. It was far more than just politics. If you look at it theologically, this is a direct, vicious attack, likely orchestrated by Satan himself. He knew a deliverer was prophesied to come from Israel. He aimed to stop God's purpose by attacking the most vulnerable, the male children, the future leaders, the very line the Messiah was promised through.
Chilling.
It is. It's a chilling reminder that evil actively tries to undermine God's plans. And tragically, this is the first recorded instance in history where an entire people, the Jews, were marked for annihilation just because of who they were, their identity. But right here in this incredibly dark moment, a light shines through the courage, the faithfulness of two women.
Absolutely. And the way the story is told is so deliberate, isn't it? It names these two Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, but the powerful Pharaoh, he remains nameless.
Such a contrast.
It's a conscious choice by the writer, elevating the courage of the seemingly powerless over the powerful but unnamed tyrant. So what exactly did these women do when they were faced with this absolutely abhorrent command? And what lasting message does their courageous act hold for us, in our everyday lives?
Well, Pharaoh commanded them to commit infanticide, plain and simple, kill every boy right there on the birth stool. Imagine this. As a baby boy is born, before the mother even gets to hold him, the midwives were supposed to snatch him and throw him into the Nile, possibly even as an offering to Hapi, the Egyptian Nile god, ensuring their death. It was monstrous. Truly. But these women, Shiphrah, her name means beautiful, and Puah meaning fragrant or maybe to cry out, they made a revolutionary choice. The text says they feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them. Instead, they saved the male children. They let them live. They even came up with a pretty clever and maybe believable excuse for Pharaoh when he questioned them, claiming the Hebrew women were just too lively, too quick, giving birth before the midwives could even get there.
Resourceful.
Very. But what's truly fascinating is what fearing God meant for them. It meant respecting God's law, his will, more than the command of an earthly king. Even a king the Egyptians thought was a living god. They made a conscious, active choice, divine authority over human decrees. It showed this profound moral compass, an unwavering conviction. And it's such a powerful statement. The mighty Pharaoh's lost to history, nameless in this account. But these two faithful women, they are specifically named, remembered, honored, because they feared the Lord.
And their action wasn't just passive resistance. They didn't just disagree quietly. They knew what was right, and they actively did it. It wasn't just thinking about it. It was active, risky obedience. So what's the obvious message there for us, for anyone listening today? The stakes might not always seem like life or death in our modern world, but we face moral choices constantly, often subtle ones. How does their story apply daily?
The message for us is crystal clear and incredibly practical. Moral courage isn't just for those big, dramatic, historical moments. It's for everyday life. For every decision, big or small. These women, who knows how much formal theology they knew? But they chose to act on what was fundamentally right in God's eyes. So for us, it means cultivating that same moral courage, steadiness of purpose, fortitude, and perseverance in our own lives. It means not just blindly accepting what others say or what's popular. Instead, it means investigating things for ourselves, studying, weighing the evidence, and then, crucially, taking it to God in prayer to figure out his will. When our conscience, guided by God's principles, tells us something is wrong, we have to have the conviction to act on that knowledge. even if it means going against popular opinion or powerful bosses or even government mandates that clash with God's clear commands.
Obeying God rather than men. Exactly. That principle from Acts 5.29. Their choice echoes down through history. And look what happened. The narrative specifically says God dealt well with the midwives. He blessed them, made them households, gave them their own large families, their own legacy, because they were faithful. Their actions had this ripple effect, way beyond just saving those babies. They set an example that influenced, the text hints, hundreds and thousands. It just shows us that choosing to do what's right, even in ways that seem small or hidden, has eternal consequences. It brings God's blessing. It reminds you, listening right now, that God sees every act of faithfulness you make, no matter how small it seems. He sees it and he will honor it. Their courage, rooted in their fear of God, literally saved a nation and became a lasting legacy.
Okay, so right in the middle of this deadly decree, with Pharaoh targeting all Hebrew baby boys, a son is born. To Amram and Jochebed, devout Israelites from the tribe of Levi. And this baby is Moses. The source describes him as a goodly child. Can you paint a picture for us of God's incredible providence here, his protection? Show us how utterly unlikely his survival really was, given that ruthless decree.
Oh, this part of the story is truly thrilling. It's miraculous, highlighting God's direct, intricate intervention. It's like a divine chess game against Pharaoh's evil plans. That word goodly from the Hebrew Tobit means way more than just, a cute baby. It signifies excellence, inherent worth, a kind of divine quality, like when God declared his creation good and very good back in Genesis.
Ah.
Moses was born not just beautiful, but as this sort of new creation destined for a huge work. His survival, it was just one breathtaking miracle after another, a masterclass in divine providence. First, his parents' incredible faith, hiding him for 3 months despite the extreme danger, defying Pharaoh's command. That showed their trust in God over the king, as Hebrews 11 points out.
Right.
Then, when they couldn't hide him anymore, his mother Jochebed's ingenious plan. She makes this little ark, a basket of rushes, waterproofs it with tar and pitch. A tiny, unsinkable boat, and she places the baby in it, hiding him among the reeds along the Nile's bank. You imagine the fear, the desperate hope in that act.
Heartbreaking.
And then his older sister, Miriam, watching faithfully from a distance. Another crucial human piece in God's puzzle. A small act of brave vigilance. And then comes the most unexpected twist imaginable. Pharaoh's own daughter, Hatshepsut likely. She's drawn, maybe by an unseen hand, to bathe at that exact spot on the Nile where the basket is hidden. Her curiosity is sparked by this little basket, and when she opens it and sees this beautiful baby crying, her compassion is awakened.
A spark of humanity.
A divine spark, really, in such a brutal world. And that compassion miraculously overruled her father's cruel decree. She decided to save him. Then Miriam, quick as a flash, steps in and suggests finding a Hebrew nurse, which leads, incredibly, to Moses being nursed and raised by his own mother, Jochebed, for roughly his first 12 years. And get this, Jochebed was actually paid by Pharaoh's treasury to raise her own son.
Incredible irony.
Totally. And those were the truly formative years, where his own family instilled in him the fear of God and the love of truth and justice, protecting him from the corruption of pagan Egypt before he even went to the palace. Just a beautiful, complex example of God using human instruments, even unlikely ones like Pharaoh's daughter, to push his plan forward and protect his chosen deliverer against absolutely impossible odds.
And then the story takes another huge turn. As a boy, Moses is taken from that humble home right into the royal palace. He's adopted as Pharaoh's daughter's son. He gets the best Egyptian education you could possibly imagine. He was essentially being groomed to be the next Pharaoh, wasn't he? To inherit the throne of one of the world's most powerful empires.
Which brings up a really thought-provoking question for us, for anyone listening today. How much are you learning? How much time and energy are you investing in things that are ultimately, well, useless for what really matters in the grand scheme of your life and God's eternal purposes? That is a crucial point for some deep reflection. It speaks right to our priorities today, doesn't it? Moses got the highest civil and military training. He mastered everything: advanced math, sciences, reading, writing, military strategy, all the skills needed to run an empire. The Bible even says he became mighty in words and in deeds, learned in all the wisdom of Egypt, Acts 7.22.
He was set up for worldly success.
Totally. Groomed for worldly power, prestige. Yet the sources really emphasize that ultimately so much of this education would be useless for, or even work against, what really mattered. And what really mattered, the knowledge of God and of his truth. Now, sure, some of his organizational skills, leadership abilities, maybe they came in handy later, leading Israel.
Practical application.
Some, perhaps, but the core worldview he learned, the pagan beliefs, the emphasis on worldly power, idolatry, that was totally opposed to his divine purpose. you actually have to unlearn a lot of it. So
Yeah.
for you listening, it invites some serious introspection. What pursuits, what knowledge, what kind of education is consuming your precious time and energy right now? Is it truly building up what really matters? Your
Sure.
character, your relationship with God, your ability to serve his eternal purposes, and focusing on the eternal, not just the temporary.
Or is a big chunk of it ultimately useless?
Exactly. It's a significant portion ultimately useless in the grand scheme of eternity. Now, this isn't saying don't learn things, don't pursue knowledge. Not at all. Knowledge is valuable. But it challenges us to prioritize, to discern what knowledge truly equips us for a life that glorifies God, that prepares us for the future He has planned, both here and in the life to come. Moses' experience is a stark reminder. Worldly knowledge, no matter how impressive or powerful it seems, it pales in comparison to knowing God and His truth. It's about distinguishing between just collecting facts and actually cultivating wisdom for a divine purpose.
Okay, so Moses, equipped with this incredible Egyptian education, the power of a prince,
Yeah.
he grows up and he sees the suffering of his own people, the Hebrews, witnesses their harsh labor, their misery. And then one day, he's 40 years old. He sees an Egyptian brutally beating a Hebrew slave and he snaps. He kills the Egyptian. So what does this mean for his calling? Was this God's plan? Was this how God intended him to start his mission as Israel's deliverer?
No, absolutely not. The sources are really clear on this. Moses acted out of a presumptuous spirit. It was rashness, driven by anger, and a mistaken belief in his own strength and position.
Not divine leading.
Far from it. One source says he manifested the spirit of him who was a murderer from the beginning. And this act actually proved himself unfit at that moment to represent the God of mercy, love, and tenderness.
Yeah.
He thought his fancy Egyptian education, his mighty abilities, his worldly training qualified him to free Israel. But he tried to do it his own way, in his own strength, using violence. And it was, as the source puts it, a miserable failure.
A big mistake.
A grave error, yes, a great sin in God's eyes, even if his motive was to help his people. And notice the text says he looked this way and that way before striking the Egyptian.
Then checking for witnesses.
Right. But he didn't look up. He didn't seek God's direction or timing. And the immediate result, the news got out. Pharaoh found out and wanted him dead. Moses had to flee Egypt, run for his life, which effectively ended any chance he had of inheriting the throne, any humanly planned path to power. His life plans just shattered in that moment.
So Moses, who seemed destined for a throne, suddenly finds himself a fugitive. He spends the next 40 years as a humble shepherd, out in Midian, so far from the power and splendor of Egypt. If killing the Egyptian wasn't God's plan, what does this huge detour teach us about how God can overrule even our biggest mistakes, our failures in any situation, and still use them for his own purposes? And how does that verse, Romans 8:28, help us understand this really important truth, especially when we look back at our own messes and failures?
This is where God's incredible grace and transformative power just shine. It's one of the deepest lessons in this whole story. While Moses' violent act was definitely not God's ideal plan, God permitted it to happen. He allowed the consequences. And then he used those next 40 years in the wilderness, tending sheep, learning patience day after day, caring for animals that were, afflicted, sick, straying, unruly.
Sounds like training for leading people.
Doesn't it? It was exactly the training he needed. It taught him the gentleness, goodness, long-suffering that are absolutely essential for a true leader of God's people. This extended time in the school of Christ, as one source calls it, was tough, rugged, but profoundly effective. It instilled deep humility, meekness, genuine faith. It taught him to rely completely on God, not on his own abilities or his Egyptian PhD, so to speak. It fundamentally changed him, transformed that hot-headed prince who thought his own might could save Israel into a humble shepherd who was finally ready to be God's instrument. And Romans 8:28 just illuminates this perfectly. And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose.
All things, even the bad things.
Even the consequences of our bad choices. Now, this doesn't mean God causes us to sin or make mistakes. He's not the author of evil. But it means he is so sovereign, so powerful, that he can take even our errors, our failures, our self-inflicted wounds, and the negative fallout. And he can weave them into this larger, beautiful, redemptive tapestry. For our ultimate good and for his glory, Moses' sin, his huge mistake, became the very catalyst God used for his divine preparation. It proves that our failures don't shock God. They don't derail his ultimate design for our lives, as long as we stay committed to him. God can take what we see as curses and turn them into blessings. He can take our sorrows and turn them into joy. He's always working towards his greater purpose.
Okay, let's pause on that point for a second because it's so important for understanding God's sovereignty, His grace, especially when we feel like we've messed up God's plan for our lives. What if Moses hadn't killed the Egyptian? Let's speculate. Would that have meant the Hebrews just wouldn't have escaped Egypt? Would God's whole plan for their deliverance have been stopped because Moses didn't commit that specific rash act? Explain that reasoning.
No, absolutely not. God's promises are certain. His covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that was unbreakable, irrevocable. The deliverance of Israel was predestined. It was a foundational, non-negotiable part of God's entire redemptive plan for humanity, foretold centuries earlier in Genesis 15.
So it was going to happen regardless.
It was going to happen. Had Moses not acted impulsively, God's plan still would have unfolded, maybe through different means, perhaps a different path for Moses himself, one less roundabout, or maybe even through a different deliverer altogether. God isn't limited to one person or one method. Remember Psalm 33. It says the Lord brings the counsel of the nations to nothing. He makes the plans of the peoples of no effect. The counsel of the Lord stands forever, the plans of his heart to all generations.
God's plan prevails.
Exactly. That biblical truth means God's ultimate will cannot be frustrated or stopped by human actions or even human inaction. This story just powerfully demonstrates God's incredible sovereignty and his remarkable ability to work through flawed, imperfect human beings. And despite their missteps and failures, our failures, your failures, they don't derail God's ultimate purposes for you or for his bigger plan. Instead, he can redeem them. He can use them to refine us, to teach us, and bring about his will in ways we could never expect or imagine. It's just this amazing testament to his infinite wisdom, his boundless grace, that he brings good out of every situation for those who love him and are committed to him. So if you're listening, think about this. Your present circumstances, no matter how tough they are, no matter how much they might feel like the result of past mistakes, they can actually be your training ground. God can use them to prepare you for a future purpose for your life. God's plans for his people cannot be stopped. They are guaranteed by his unchanging character. That's solid ground.
Wow. Okay, looking back at this whole sequence of events then, from the initial prosperity, the shift to terrible oppression, Moses' miraculous birth and upbringing, then his rash act, the 40 years in the desert. What's the ultimate enduring takeaway message about God's faithfulness through all of that? What's the biggest, most impactful truth we can hold on to?
I think the overarching message is just crystal clear and profoundly hopeful. Despite Satan's direct, vicious attempts to stop God's plans, you see it in Pharaoh's escalating death decrees, his whole oppressive system. God consistently overrules. He always has the final say. He uses faithful people from those courageous midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, who feared him more than Pharaoh. To Moses' devout parents, Amram and Jochebed, he uses them to accomplish his will even when the odds seem completely impossible. This deep dive reminds us all, that yes, we live in the territory of our enemy. Jesus himself called Satan the prince, or the ruler of this world. But the good news, the real gospel truth, is that Jesus Christ has already defeated him definitively. Through his perfect life, his sacrifice on the cross, his glorious resurrection, Satan's ultimate end is certain. Revelation foretells it. So this whole narrative is just this constant, unwavering reminder God is for us. He is never against us. Even when the enemy seems to be winning or when our circumstances feel totally crushing, his faithfulness is the absolute bedrock of our hope.
You talked earlier about God allowing the oppression, the 400-year delay in intervention, and the wisdom in his timing versus our limited view. Let's just touch on that again briefly, because it brings up another dub question we often wrestle with during long trials. Why did it take so long for God to step in with full deliverance for Israel? And why is making that distinction that each person suffered only as long as the person lived? Why is that so important for understanding human suffering generally?
Yeah.
Especially when we face difficulties that feel like they'll never end.
It's really vital to revisit that because it gets to the heart of how we reconcile suffering with God's goodness. As we discussed, God's timing is often profoundly different from our immediate wants. Those 400 years in Egypt serve multiple, big-picture divine purposes: growing Israel into a nation, spiritual purification, and providing that unmatched object lesson to the world about God's power when he finally acted. The divine delay wasn't God being inactive, it was preparation, strategic patience. Now, that distinction, each person suffered only as long as that single person lived. Yes, it's crucial for finding comfort and perspective in our own suffering. While the national trial spanned those long 400 years, remember, no single individual lived through it all.
Right, the personal lifespan perspective.
Yeah, exactly. Each person's suffering, real, intense, deeply personal, still had a finite end with their own individual life. Seeing it that way helps us grasp that even within these long, seemingly endless generational or societal struggles, God's care is intensely personal. It's individual. He knows. He's intimately concerned with the pain and the tears of each person. So your personal suffering, while completely valid and incredibly hard, is not actually endless. And it's not without purpose in his grand design.
It offers hope.
It offers immense comfort, I think. It assures you that God sees, he measures, he values your unique experience within his larger redemptive plan. It reminds us there is an end to every individual's earthly trial. There is light at the end of the tunnel. And ultimately, life's difficulties can be overcome by God's grace. That grace available to Christ is our only true unwavering hope. It empowers us, strengthens us to get through anything. It means God knows your tears, your experience is seen, it's valued, and it can be redeemed by him. Hashtag tag tag outro.
Wow. What a powerful journey we've taken today, just looking at the background and the birth of Moses. We've seen these incredible examples of human courage right in the face of tyranny. We've seen divine providence just orchestrating the impossible, and God's profound ability to use even our mistakes, our failures, for his ultimate redemptive purposes. It really is a story of unwavering faithfulness, isn't it? Showing that God never forgets his people, even when they're gripped by oppression and despair, or even when their own actions seem to lead them way off track.
Indeed, it's incredibly encouraging. And as you reflect on everything we've discussed in this deep dive, maybe consider this provocative thought. It's a profound promise, really, especially for those times when life's mysteries or prolonged suffering or disappointments just weigh heavily on you. It goes like this. In the future life, the mysteries that here have annoyed and disappointed us will be made plain. We shall see that our seemingly unanswered prayers and disappointed hopes have been among our greatest blessings.
That's something to think about.
It really is something for you to mull over, to explore in your own heart as you continue your journey, trusting that God's plan, his purpose, is always perfect, always good, even when it's hidden from our sight right now and maybe even feels counterintuitive to what we desire or expect. His perspective is so much higher than ours.